Hi everybody, welcome here tonight. My name's Jennifer, like Billy said. So shortly after the loss of my fiance, my aunt, who was 3 years into her journey after losing her husband, told me that grief comes in waves. I'll never forget those words she said as I cried on the other end of the phone. She said, "Jen, some days the waves come up and just wash over your feet. Some days they'll come up at your knees and just shake your balance a little bit, and other days the waves will come up and hit you in the face and knock you straight over." On August 29th of 2018, my fiance had been missing for 2.5 weeks. He overdosed that morning in the early hours in a motel room, surrounded by a bunch of people he didn't know. He was on life support for several days, was declared brain dead, and passed away a few days later. Over the years that followed his death, I did a lot of work on grief. I saw counselors, I read articles, talked to other people who had lived the same experience as I did. And although each individual's loss and experience with it is unique, the one thing that everyone I've spoken to seems to have in common after losing somebody from addiction was that their loss started long before the death of the person they loved. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a person in long-term recovery. After being clean for many years, I was having a conversation with my mother, and she told me something that day during that conversation that we were having about her friend's son who had passed away from an overdose. As we spoke about grief, a grief that I didn't yet in 2015 have a personal experience with, she said to me that she didn't understand exactly what her friend was going through because I, as her daughter, had survived my addiction. She did tell me what she knew about grief, and what she said to me was, "Jen, I grieved your death while you were still alive." Those words I have never stopped hearing in my head, and I think of them in my hardest moments during my sobriety. I know now that what that's called is anticipatory grief. We all seem to share this form of grief, trauma, and pain when we've lost a loved one that suffered from addiction. Not only do we seem to grieve their death while they're still physically here with us on this earth, but another commonality I've noticed to every person that I've spoken to about their loss has shared with me is that they have all at times pictured the day where they would get the news over and over again in the years leading up to the death. Who would be the one that finds their loved one? Would it be the police that notify them? Would it be a phone call from a family member that delivers the news? Would they be the ones to find them? We spend days and nights waiting for that day to come. Every unknown number could be that call we live each day praying won't ever come. The one thing we all said was that when it finally came, it felt nothing like we ever imagined it would. I myself had pictured that day so many times through periods of active addiction, and then through periods where my fiance would go into treatment, and I would get my hopes up in these periods of sobriety where I truly believed he might come out of it, only to find myself grieving the loss of who he was sober all over again when he would relapse and turn into somebody I didn't recognize. When that day finally came, it wasn't like I ever pictured. It wasn't who I thought that I would get the news from. It wasn't how I imagined it would feel. It was so much more painful. That loss shook my world. I had already lost him so many times, but this one was final. There was no hope left of him getting better or finding sobriety again. No hope of him getting into detox. No hope of trying tough love this time. My hope for his life and our future died with him. Through a lot of family support, amazing friends, counselors, grief groups, and conversations with people who understood what I was going through, I got to the other side of what was one of the darkest times of my life. There are statements or cliches that people that are trying to be supportive use when you're going through those type of losses. They say things like, "He's not struggling anymore, he's in a better place, or in time it will heal." After losing him, I didn't want to hear any of that stuff. It actually made it hurt even worse because I didn't want to believe any of those things initially. But over time, that loss made me strong. It made me believe I could survive anything. It also allowed me to see how precious life is and that tomorrow isn't promised. It pushed me to move back to Massachusetts to be close to my family and to be there for my parents as they're getting older. To be here to see my nieces and nephews grow up. To be close to the people that are irreplaceable to me. It took nearly 4 years after his loss to truly believe those words, that he is finally at peace and find comfort in the idea that he is no longer suffering. His death gave me something beautiful. It gave me the experience of that loss and the ability to use it to support others I cross paths with in their grief journey and be able to relate in a way that only someone who has experienced it can, and for that I am grateful.